Welcome to Season 7 of Any Given Runway. I'm your host, Randall Brown. Through conversations, books, and the occasional rabbit hole, this show explores creativity, curiosity, and the stories that shape us. Everyone has a story, each person a scholar. Today's guest is Canadian author Tyson Stewart. Tyson is a professor at Nipissing University. His work explores Indigenous identity, culture, and the challenges of navigating the modern world while remaining connected to history and tradition. His latest novel, Return of the Nish, examines questions of belonging and personal identity through a contemporary Indigenous lens. During our conversation, we discuss the inspiration behind the book and how Tyson's experience as a professor has shaped his approach to writing and teaching. The novel Return of the Nish is for people who enjoy stories rooted in Indigenous culture, contemporary Canadian settings that highlight the outdoors and the beauty of Northern Canada, and novels that explore community, identity, and belonging. I think this book is also for people who've ever felt the pull of something more, maybe the pull of the big city, perhaps those who grew up in a small town and juggled the idea of moving to a city or staying true to one's community. Readers who love family dynamics, cultural history, and character-driven fiction will also find plenty to appreciate in Tyson's novel, Return of the Nish. So let's go ahead and welcome Tyson to the show, and let's learn.
Well, thank you so much. I'm new to all of this, so I'm really just grateful for any attention. I'm thrilled that you've read the book, and I'm sure Mark is trying to keep everyone busy.
Well, I'm going to jump right into that. You just mentioned you're new to this. So what is publishing life like right now for you? Is your head spinning?
It's been a feeling of relief, I guess, and a feeling of having finally published something of my own. Although I've made short films, like I went to film school. Writing was always a part of my life. Um, but this is probably a little bit more attention than I'm used to.
A little more of the attention than you. I love that. I love it. Well, Return of the Nish. Tell me about the premise and what inspired its creation.
So what I've been saying is that it's a sweet little family reconnection story that slowly morphs into a crime thriller. And that's the distilled elevator pitch these days. It's hard to summarize something that goes into many different directions and obviously takes place in, overseas, and a lot of it is set in Ontario. But it is about a troubled young man who is a pilot, and he is reconnecting with his Anishinaabe side of his family in his, I guess, early 20s. And he's finding a lot of answers to questions that he had and mysteries surrounding his childhood and the separation of his parents, and wanting to have a connection with folks that are in a very adjacent community to where he grew up. And he finally feels ready, I suppose, to mend those broken ties that were not really of his doing. Like, it was really his parents' generation that kind of caused the severing of those relationships. So he's finding a very warm, hospitable, welcoming community that is accepting him and is, I think, happy and joyful about his return into like this small Anishinaabe community in Northern Ontario. So he does develop very strong bonds with his aunt and uncle and his Nokomis, and don't want to give too much away, but eventually there are references to sort of dark elements percolating in the community, and the presence of drugs and maybe some internalized forms of violence or lateral violence, perhaps. They become clearer why that is happening much later. But I think that is as long of a setup as I can provide.
Yeah. Could you explain the title? I know you mentioned Nish in the book that other characters are talking about that, but I wasn't too familiar with what that referred to. I'm assuming it's slang of the cultural slang, but I wasn't too sure.
It's just, yeah, it's like a shorthand way of talking about Nish or Nobs or Anishinaabe people.
Yeah.
It's a kind of slang, not too polite, probably, way of referring to, yeah, a culture within like the umbrella of indigeneity. Um, so there's ways of shorthand ways of more familiar ways of referring to ourselves.
Okay. Contextually, that's what I assumed it to be, but I was figured I'd ask you as well. The book, one of the main themes is this contrast between small town life and then going away to chase bigger dreams down in the city, whether that be professional sports or whether that be becoming a pilot. It's
Hmm.
such an interesting dilemma and one that I'm familiar with too, growing up in a small town. What interests you specifically about that tension?
Yeah, I think it is a tension that I try to deconstruct, if I may. I grew up with sports, and the kind of cultural scene around hockey was maybe the most active of all the sports scenes in Northern Ontario. Every member of my family, I think, played hockey. I played hockey. There was always a sense, I don't know how, but that like some people will make it big and some people will join the big league. And one of my first hockey teams as like a peewee, I was playing with Corey Perry, who later became an NHL superstar. So there was there, and as I say, it's just based off of lived experience of like knowing how much they are celebrated and how much kind of pressure also there is placed on becoming an excellent hockey player. And it's often seen as like one of the ways of attaining a great life or a sense of celebrity. And so that was something that I think I wanted to explore a little bit. And I mean, I know like people in my family, friends who have become pilots, flight attendants who have traveled the world. Um, Actually, my mom was a flight attendant for many, many years. So there's there's always that sense of yeah, the kind of returning home after experiencing the world and like new cities and new environs that offer kind of different culture, different way of looking at the world, different forms of celebrating culture too. I think my experience in my 20s going to Athens was really, really formative. And seeing the Parthenon and all the ancient ruins that are connected to histories of philosophy and great kind of schools of thought. And just the way that that is still celebrated and really a part of the Greek pride, and seeing that there is not such a kind of respect for the ancient in North America, where I think there's like a line in the book about like how we just bulldoze forests and create shopping malls and highways and the but there is that cultural continuity within indigenous cultures and like their presence here for millennia with governance systems, with certain ceremonies, certain forms of foodways and dress have and technologies have always really been in North America as well. It's just they're not as visible or celebrated. I felt.
Yeah.
So I really want to say also that I don't try to kind of say that city life or the overseas Europe is a better way of doing it. And because there's problems, there's certain there could be problems there too, like anywhere else. But also when you come back home, it doesn't mean that you're just returning to this like virginal, pristine, untouched, beautiful, perfect place. Like there's presence of harmful substances. There's the kind of internalized forms of assimilation and racism that can also come back to your home reserve. And there's been a number of like films and books that I think have like inspired that kind of outlook, which is, I guess, a darker outlook than maybe people are expecting.
Yeah. You're not saying that there's a utopia on one side or the other. It's more about the internal evolution that one has when they have these new perspectives. Who did you write first, the father or the son?
They were connected in a uh, jubilant, dark, uh, sort of sloppy dance from the beginning.
Okay.
They were the two protagonists that I couldn't separate really. I felt like they were both going down they were leading very different lives, and you kind of see those kinds of parallel existences like throughout the novel. The father is going down a path that he chose after a certain amount of failure, a certain amount of um, greed, and but also mounting responsibilities and like pressures from family and whatnot. And he's probably the character who got like disconnected as well from his community and his values, um, because of chasing fame, chasing the spotlight, and maybe those experiences being in Europe and being recruited to the NHL and whatnot, kind of shaped his outlook on what is important in life. Whereas I think the son is just coming back into the fold of his Anishinaabe relatives and just trying to understand, um, the ways that the community works and why the family, what the family thought about his growing up apart from them. So he's pursuing more questions, and I think the father doesn't pursue questions. I think he pursues like greed and pleasure and wealth. Um, but he's also he's also very much an Anishinaabe person is who loves his family and who wants to, I think, um, still have still play a valuable role in his community. But it's kind of an odd kind of love because he does so many harmful things as well.
Yeah.
But they were great. They were both, I think, two very interesting characters to write, like to kind of work out how much do you keep them apart and what kind of tension or explosions can happen when you put them together, and they can be like the son is of pre-programmed, I think, to like be resentful and be have all these questions, about why weren't you there? And the father is just is despite his negative side, um he's still trying in his own way. He's trying to be there for his son, which is kind of a skewed way of being there, but it is nonetheless how they became buddies.
Yeah, and he uses the word buddy or friend a few times in there as well. This being your first novel, I'm sure you've learned a ton. And I initially was going to ask you, what have you learned? But I mean, we'd be here another hour if we talked about all probably what you learned from the process. So, what's one thing that has stood out of the things you've learned? What's one thing that stood out?
It won't be like the kind of answer that maybe writers want, but like from a very early age, I was in love with screenwriting and developing ideas for the screen, describing action and like less about the inner psychology and intentions of the characters, but to throw characters into situations where they had to react or where action would actually move the story forward, and that it was more um, more valuable for me to kind of describe the context and the kind of scenery and the specific, I like the word you say, like the tensions that can, or the conflicts that can be produced by putting very different characters together, and and all of them are pursuing goals, right? So I think that was brought forward into the narrative fiction context, and it just allowed me, frankly, to write a story without having to think about a budget or working with a committee or making decisions on my own that I thought would be the best ones for the story. And this novel is set in part in Amsterdam, in Jamaica, in Toronto, and Mexico. And if I needed to make this into a feature-length film, it would probably be like the most expensive indigenous film budget of all time, right? So I'm fairly happy that I did the switch to writing a novel after toiling for many years before and after film school, writing in the screenplay format. Having said that, I did make a few short films in film school, and they were all wonderful experiences. So it's just a matter of I guess finding the right project for the genre and the format you want to pursue. But for the near future, I feel like these are going to. I want to write three. No one should ever say they're writing like two novels, but this is where we are. The plan, I've written half of the second novel, and I have a plan for the third. And after that, who knows? If stories keep on coming to me, then I'll keep writing. If not, maybe I'll switch things up.
Your background in academics, I'm sure that helped in a lot of ways, but did it hinder you at all? Was there times where you had to maybe shove critical thinking to the wind and just be like, no, this is, you mentioned something earlier about you could do it without having to be on a committee. And that's immediately what I thought about with academia. You were able to make these decisions on your own. So did you have to retrain your brain in a way to write a novel coming from academic background?
Um, I I really respect scholarship and especially like critical philosophy in the humanities and the questions that are pursued and the kind of critique that they can provide to understand our culture and our lives better. I do feel like there is a little bit of an expectation these days to have everything um, peer reviewed and looked over and absolutely yeah, almost like reviewed to the umpteenth degree. And you can't really do that if you're, I think, if you're writing journalism, it's also difficult to have everything like an ethics review for everything that you're covering and trying to gather quotes and perspectives in real time as things are unfolding, and to convey that you need a certain amount of training to know how to ethically go about asking questions and understanding your limitations. But I think, like journalism, if you're writing a novel, you're 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 trying to describe the world in as accurate and as relevant a way to capture the reader's attention, to cover situations or histories like those aspects of being in an indigenous community where there might be certain forms of lateral violence, where there might be the effects of colonialism that are still rearing their ugly head. There can be a lot of confusion around who is indigenous, who isn't, just by the fact that residential schools and later the 60s scoop tried to literally remove children from their communities and rupture those connections to culture. So there can be an identity crisis in indigenous communities that maybe isn't as rampant in the overculture. And then there's certain elements that as cultures are being revitalized, as language work is being done, and we're returning to more of a land-based education, and we're trying to do that both within our native communities and within higher education, we can't forget that there are these more negative emotions and circumstances that may not be, let's just say, like, they're swept under the rug too often, because it's always better to focus on the achievements and the victories and the positive than to take a deep dive into the ways that we're still figuring out our relationship with settler Canadians and the histories that we've experienced. So it's kind of like a journalistic, to cut a long story short, a pursuit of truth is what I feel like I can do in fiction. And it's just an interesting question that maybe sometimes the truth isn't always what can be done on research committees or even in the classroom, because we have to be very sensitive to everyone's feelings. But in the literary context, I felt more freedom than I have in certain compared to certain respects to academia, for sure.
Now that you finished one book and you're on your second, what's your writing routine like when you're deep in the project? Talk to me through how you set up your writing, the time of day. Just what's it like?
This is the hardest question. No, no, this is the most boring question.
Sorry, so I apologize.
Sorry, rephrase, boring answer. I'm I would love to say something inspirational. I I try to take as many notes and voice memos as possible, whether that be like driving or going for a hike or in this winter snowshoeing. I'll just bring my phone and earbuds and try to make as many notes as possible and even like act out a scene or two if I can. And then later, when I'm in my office or around my laptop, I will try to, um, refine that and transcribe it in a way that is something approximating a rough draft. um, so it's very, very tedious, but also when you're cooking, and there's nothing better really than you know coming up with some good lines or some good descriptions. Um, I work on structure a lot too. Like I'm always obsessed with the structure, the overall plot. What order things will go in? Do I want it nonlinear? Do I want to stay with something for a long, drawn out period of time? Or um, and what will eventually be a revelation, and what needs to be mystery, mystery, mystery for a very long time. I I'm not saying I succeed at doing that, but I think about it a lot in any case.
You mentioned your love for screenwriting, so I'm curious. The screenwriters or the movies that you can watch just for the dialogue are what?
Oh, wow. That is a fun question. That's the question we could be here all day, by the way. Um, wow. Okay, well, the Nicholas Pileggi Scorsese collaborations are eternally rewatchable. Um, I think that Casino is a very long, non-narrative film. Um, and it feels more like an experimental music video than an actual like plot-driven film. Um, but there's dialogue all over that I think is really great. Um, the the fight that Sharon Stone and Robert De Niro have on their front yard. It's just when you understand your characters and you get to know them and you have this connection with them, and you kind of already anticipate what they're gonna say, and it's still there's still this kind of real delight in watching it play out. I really like Heist by David Mamet that I reference in the novel. I think his mastery is about that kind of keeping the mystery, withholding until the moment of payoff. The Spanish Prisoner, also David Mamet, where he puts his quite naive protagonist through an incredibly elaborate con that we should see coming from a mile away, but we kind of don't. Um, and then what? Well, Reese, I'm about halfway through Vineland right now. I was a big fan of One Battle After Another. I thought that was an excellent, exhilarating time at the movies. Um, there's memorable dialogue in that one with Leo on the phone, forgetting his passwords.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm a
like
I'm a
I'm,
Tarantino
I'm
guy. Tarantino, he's mine. He's I think all of his for dialogue. That's always my favorite.
Yeah, his specialty, I think, is breaking the veneer of civility. Like he'll always have a scene, whether it be in a diner or restaurant or like in the in Hateful Eight in that cabin where everything seems to be just like we're doing this, we're doing just civility. We're talking, we're getting to know each other, but then out of the blue, there's always this moment of this outburst of violence, and then you have to sit with the consequences of it a lot as well. And sometimes a whole film can be just what happens with that violence. I think Pulp Fiction is a good example of that. I agree. I think Tarantino, out of the 90s filmmakers, he's in my like top two.
Yeah.
Like some people will say, Todd Solondz, or they'll say, Paul PTA, of course, and there's so many. But for me, it has always been Tarantino as well.
Fantastic. The only other one that I think is on that level of as far as pure dialogue, All About Eve.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Well, now we're almost like back into the noir era. So
Yeah.
that's where it gets, yeah, that's where a lot of this is all ultimately from.
And
So, yeah.
like you said, we'd be able to talk about this for hours more, probably. What a wild time for you. You've got the excitement of a new book, but also the chaos of moving. I hope you take time to just enjoy and appreciate the fact that you are a novelist now. What a fantastic title.
Well, again, like I was really interested in your podcast because I spent my 20s like flying around Europe basically with my mom and going to all of the big cities, and um, just the travel broadens your mind kind of cliche. There's only one chapter in the book that describes a location I have never been to, and I'm kind of, that's maybe my one regret, is that because I really wanted to recall and relive some of those moments, especially because I started writing it during the COVID lockdowns, and all I really wanted to do was travel again. And so, if there's other reasons that for writing, this was a big one as well. Probably shouldn't say the place I've never been to. I think it would be
No, keep it
problematic.
secret. Keep it secret for now, but just make it a point that you visit there soon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Okay, and I'll keep listening. I loved the interview with Lindsay of My Twin is a
Oh, okay.
Murderer, I believe. And my second novel is Anishinaabe Kwe Twins. Yeah, so yeah, these twin stories are really, really hard to write.
Interesting. Interesting.
Like
I'm
you
gonna,
shouldn't even attempt it, really. But
yeah, I'll send her a message today. I'll send her a message and tell her that you enjoyed it. So,
yeah, tell her I loved it. Not that she shouldn't have done it. That it's really difficult to make them work without that kind of mistaken identity stuff going on the whole time. It's
Stanley Cup's over. Stanley Cup's over. Get your sleep because you're going to need it for moving.
Mhm.
Finish the next book,
Yeah.
and then come back and we'll talk about that one.
Okay. Deal. Thank
Perfect.
you so much.
Thank you,
Okay.
Tyson. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. Much appreciation to Tyson. Much appreciation to Cormorant Books. Pick up his new novel, Return of the Nish. Everyone has a story. Each person a scholar. Thank you for listening. Fill up that passport. I'll see you on the road. A bientôt.